The time is 8:35 and you're still listening to Salam Media. My name is Salayelo. I'm standing in for Ashraf Gada. Hope you're having a blessed Ramadan wherever you're listening to us in the world. Great to be pleasure of your company. Yeah, previous interview was a bit disturbing. But really, an important issue there that I think Dr. Swimmer is bringing to the fore: pervasive obstetric violence. Yeah, should look that a bit more. But yeah, we're moving on to, I think, another issue that I think is literally affecting everyone. I mentioned when I opened the show that I myself was doing a bit of grocery shopping this past weekend, and it just feels like each and every day you go to the supermarket, the prices go up. Whether it's the price of bread, the price of oil, basic foods that you wouldn't expect to be that expensive, but they seem to be going up tremendously. And we'll be chatting to Competition Commission Economist Kagiso Zwane about the unjustified price increase of essential food and how that has prompted an investigation from the Competition Commission. I'm not sure if he's with us already. Good morning, Kagiso. How are you?
Good morning, Sarah. How are you?
Thank you for giving us your time. Let's just dive into it. The first question I have is, obviously South Africa is a free market, um, you know, where businesses essentially can charge whatever much they feel like their consumers, their customers would be able to afford. So when it comes to food and the involvement of the competition commission, what has you guys worried? We know that um food food is increasing, but what gets you involved? What makes you worried about how drastically the prices are going up?
Thank you for your question. I think you started it quite well. Ideally, we would expect in a free market not to really have many concerns.
Mm,
But the nature of South Africa's markets is incredible amounts of concentration. So there are very few firms in key markets, and those firms get a degree of market power, which means that prices and price formation might not necessarily be as competitive as it would be in a completely free market. And that is why competition authorities around the world exist, to regulate those sort of markets where entry and exit aren't as free flowing as would otherwise be expected. And the risk there, of course, is higher prices than the competitive prices. And that is
mm,
what we're flagging in the food markets. We have incredibly concentrated food markets throughout the value chain. And in a time of crisis like this, the market power that those firms have does raise the risk of prices that are opportunistic, unjustified by underlying costs, or even a price gouging. And this is a global conversation. I just read an article in the Financial Times where the European Central Bank is making similar statements about the nature of inflation in Europe as well.
mm. Just give us a bit of insight about this inquiry that the competition commission is going to be setting up. I'm not sure if you guys have started already. What will you guys be looking at specifically? I mean, the justification of these rising food prices and how astronomical they are, I'm sure would be load shedding. That the economy is not doing that well. You have the war in Ukraine. All of this seems to be justified. They seem to make sense to an untrained ear. But to the competition commission, why are they not making sense? And the inquiry itself, what will you be looking at, and who, importantly, will you be looking at?
I think the factors that you mentioned are correct and are pervasive. I don't think we can run away from the fact that this is a very difficult operating environment for most businesses. And it does come down to load shedding, comes down to other fuels, and the impact of the war in Ukraine, as you mentioned. So we can't run away from the fact that these shocks do occur from time to time, and we are currently in a period of such inflationary shocks. The Commission's central concern, however, is that shocks are not used to profiteer off consumers ultimately. This is a
Mm,
high poverty context, and consumers are incredibly sensitive to price increases in staple foods. So since the beginning of the pandemic, we have been monitoring essential food markets, essential food prices, looking at staple goods, bread, maize meal, cooking oil, and fresh produce. And on the fresh produce side, that those findings are really what has led to the inquiry, the fresh produce inquiry, because there are features in that market which don't seem to make sense. And for consumers, I think this translates quite this can be just translated into this widening gap between what farmers are getting paid for their produce and what ultimately happens in the shelf. So the Commission is essentially concerned about what is happening in between the farm to the shelf. And then for the farmer side, on inputs, we're talking things like pesticides, talking fertilizers. All of these are made with chemical byproducts, and the current energy situation with regards to gas pricing, etc., has had an effect on those primary inputs. There's also part of the inquiry will also look at seed. So it's really taking a few key fresh produce items and understanding those value chains and what may be driving pricing there and the extent to which competition is not working as it should to check price increases to the benefit of consumers.
I want to share a bit about the government's role. Should they be involved in any way? Is there anything that they should be doing that they are not doing in mitigating the rising cost of living in South Africa, particularly looking at food? I mean, South Africa's poverty stats are going up by the week. Is there anything government that is supposed to be doing or that they are not doing that maybe you can shed some light? Should there be any subsidies, or I don't know, speaking to the producers themselves about how they manage the rising cost of food?
Look, there are conversations happening with regards to how to protect the poor from food price increases. So a recent example is the DG Murray Trust, based in Cape Town, has recently put out a proposal to subsidize key goods that are important for the growth of children, because they have identified stunting to be a key developmental constraint. So there is a need to broaden the discussion on how to protect the poor from food price increases, because it is not always going to be the case that there is a competition case to be answered. Sometimes food price increases are indeed legitimate. And even when they are legitimate and not as a result of market power or any anti-competitive conduct, the effect remains the same. So there is a definite need across society for people to come together and think better as to how to protect the poor from food price increases. I think that conversation is now ongoing, and it's incredibly urgent in the current context.
Okay, Kagiso, before I let you go, the inquiry has been set up. If the findings happen to be what you guys are looking for, and indeed the rise in food prices are unjustified, what would be the mitigating steps to take, or will that only happen after the inquiry has did its investigations and their findings? But would we see a drop in some of the food items that the commission feels are justifiably high? Would that essentially result into more money into the consumer's pocket? And would there be from the producers themselves and whoever's making the food, would there be that understanding that, okay, we need to do bring money back, reduce these food prices, and try to make sure that whatever we've been doing through these times is essentially put to a stop?
Yeah, look, our hope and indeed expectation is that should shocks pass, if we view the current moments as a temporary shock, for example, the conflict in Ukraine, that when those shocks pass and they result in decreasing input costs, that those costs are passed on to the consumer. So we expect that discipline to be in place. In terms of then the inquiry, so the findings of inquiries obviously depend on what comes out, but those findings are now binding, which is something that is new. And that's what I think it will only be the second inquiry that is run under that regime of binding findings. And those.
Let me just quickly jump in there. You're saying that this is the second inquiry. With regards to the first inquiry, what did you guys deduce from that? Just
Okay,
quickly.
so this is I'm talking like just general market inquiry. So this
Yeah.
is the second market inquiry. The first one is about the digital economy, so it doesn't really touch on food. So whatever food-related findings in this fresh produce inquiry will be binding on the parties. And then there's also an ongoing investigation. So investigations and inquiries are slightly different processes. And the investigations we have requested information from the firms in the sector, and are going through that. And should there be a case to be answered, the process is that we will refer that case to the Competition Tribunal for prosecution. And if at the tribunal level there is an infringement found, then the offending parties can be fined up to 10% of their revenue. And if the infringement is a cartel, that they find collusion and agreement amongst competitors to undermine the competitive process, then the staff or directors of those companies can also face criminal sanctions.
Are the sanctions enough though? These are big corporations. Usually just feels like whatever sanctions that you guys are proposing, or after the prosecutions have taken place, it's more like a slap in the wrist. After that, they lie down for a few months, years, and then it pops up again. The issue of rising food prices has been, a thing that's been happening for quite a long time. And I'm sure since the Competition Commission's existence, you've been looking at it over and over and over again. Could there be harsher consequences for these corporations, or if there are cartels, as you mentioned?
Look, I think the sanctions that we have are effective. And I think, to date, they might have been an effective deterrent. We don't know what has not happened simply because we can't see it. But if we think back to a very early food case that the Commission pursued, it was the bread cartels in the early 2000s. And I mean, there we were talking fines of close to 1 billion rand. So you can imagine 1 billion rand 20 years ago. That is not small. And that is, for the directors there, even if they don't face criminal sanctions, you can imagine what your shareholders would say if you report to them at the end of the financial year that you've had to pay a fine in the region of several billion rands. And if we take that billion rand and grow it now, that will be several billion rands. So I think they are effective as a deterrent, which is what we want them to be. I think ideally as a society, we don't want to be prosecuting cartel cases or price fixing cases. We simply don't want that conduct to exist. And on that level, we hope that the penalties are effective.
No, thank you so much, Kagiso Zwane, there, an economist with the Competition Commission. They're speaking to us briefly about an inquiry that has been prompted by the unjustified price in the increase of essential food by the Competition Commission. Thank you for giving us your time, Kagiso. We'll be keeping an eye on the inquiry, and hopefully once the findings are done, you'll come back and tell us who's getting another fine. Hope this time won't be a slap on the wrist. Stuff. Thank you, Kagiso. Rising food prices. I mean, the figures are just astronomical, man. If you can look at the price of bread and just how much it has went up. The price of essentials like cooking oil. It's all just been too much for the consumer to handle, and South African consumers are already dealing with a lot. I mean, you can imagine the rise in electricity prices, food prices, petrol. It's all just becoming a bit too much to handle, and at some point someone needs to be held responsible. I mean, there's a comment here from Hanifa Bagas. Says, please, we the pensioners are suffering, only you can help. And you can imagine the amount of pensioners and people that are surviving off, those grants in South Africa. Is certainly a lot for them to handle. But that's going to be a story that we'll be keeping an eye on as time continues. But for now, we're going to be moving on to another segment of the show. As I mentioned, my favorite segment of the show, Fired Up, motivating you, to take on the day. Ramadan or not, nothing should be keeping you down. And Hafiz Imran Chunara, CEO of African Muslims Agency, will be joining us for that segment. We'll hear what he has to say. The topic for today is healing yourself. Very important. Sometimes we want to heal the people around us without focusing on ourselves, and you can't heal and be, a person that's that helps. That becomes a point of reference for other people if you yourself are not okay. So after the break, Hafiz Imran Chunar, CEO of African Muslims Agency, getting us fired up. Topic: healing yourself. Tune in.